Good afternoon, City of Rochester. Thank you for taking time on your busy day, probably your lunch break, to join us for the first episode of the Equity Series in 2025, which also happens to be our 19th episode of the Equity Series. So we're really glad that you're here. Please join as you are most comfortable, whether that's with your camera on or your camera off and having your lunch. As we proceed, please feel free to utilize the chat if you have any questions or reflections that you would like to share. But our episode today is Beyond the Ballot, Diverse Voices in Local Leadership. But before we get started on that, just sharing a little bit about the Equity Alliance. The Equity Alliance is a collaboration between the City of Rochester and Destination Medical Center. So my name is Chamotela. I serve the City of Rochester as a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director. I'm joined by my counterpart from DMC, Wafa El Khalifa, who serves as the Equitable Development Coordinator. I will be working through the session today, and Wafa will be monitoring the chat. So again, feel free to utilize that chat to say hello, enter your name and your organization or affiliation, and anything else that you would like to share. The Equity Alliance is about collaborative equity in practice. We want to bring together private and public organizations and individuals who are actively interested and working towards the equity or the work of equity and justice in our community. And we hope to accelerate that equitable change by working together and learning together. And so the Equity Series is very specific to learning together and then taking some of those learnings back to our organizations into our daily practice. The other thing I would like to share is that the Equity Alliance has these 5 anchors that anchor all of the work that we do. The first one is continuous improvement, ongoing diversity, equity, and inclusion action planning so that we're moving forward, focusing on economic impact, transparency, and radical collaboration, working together in ways that we haven't before. For our episode today, we really want to focus on the idea of policy and why policy is really important. So the Equity Alliance has committed to co-creating a healthy Rochester where everyone participates equitably in the design of public policy. So we've shared this numerous times, and today I put that in bold and underlined it because we're really thinking about public policy and how it impacts every community member that lives in our community, but focusing on why policy is important and why leadership and legislative leadership is important. So as we're thinking about policy change today, I want us to ground ourselves in the idea that policy change occurs across the board, from the national level to the local level. We see this through bodies like the Congress, right? If we're thinking about that federally, to our city council locally, to county boards or school boards, all of which are elected offices. And this is where lawmakers get to create and amend laws. And why would that be important? For those of us who know this, bear with me. For those of us who don't know this, it's important for us to think about how policies impact communities. Policies, they shape rules. They decide on resource flow, where those resources are going and to whom. But they also provide opportunities to individuals and groups. This influences all of the social determinants of health in every community, be that education, healthcare, housing policy, public safety, transportation, all of the things that I have listed on the screen. But the biggest thing from an equity perspective is the impact that they have on the quality of life of residents in communities. So depending on where those resources are going, the type of education that our children are receiving, the healthcare that we have access to, all of those things impact daily life. So obviously, well-crafted policies can promote equity, and that's our aspiration. Well-crafted policies can improve access to services, they can address community needs, they can impact disparities in a very positive way by reducing them. On the flip side, when we're thinking about poorly designed policies, those actually can create barriers and deepen inequalities. A great example of this would be policies that were designed around housing. Most of you are aware of the policies that were created in the 40s onto the 50s that kind of mandated areas that were safe and those that weren't safe, those that were ranked highly when it came to housing policy, and those that were marked red on our maps, which is what influences what we see as red-lined maps today. And most folks could think about that and say, well, why does that matter? Community members that lived in redlined areas had higher interest rates for their mortgages if they were able to access a mortgage. Those homes were assessed at a much lower value than other homes in communities and neighborhoods. And that had a huge impact on whether or not some communities were able to have or accrue generational wealth. Those policies still impact communities today. So as we're thinking about well-designed policies will promote equity, and poorly designed policies will obviously promote inequity within communities. How does that tie into the election or ballots? So I pulled up a picture, one of the Minnesota State Legislature, trying to stay away from the local portion of it, and was looking at it twofold. One, looking at race and ethnicity on one hand, and it is quite clear there is overrepresentation for white community in terms of the legislature, and very low representation for our community members that are communities of color, whether those are African American, Hispanic, Latino, or those identified as other. I also thought it was interesting to look at this from a generational perspective, looking at our millennial generation, Generation X and Boomer, and how that distribution, what that distribution looks like. Maybe a little bit of traction on the millennial generation, but clearly still a disparity in that representation. Well, I often hear the question, why does representation matter? And what I would like to say before I move on to the next slide is what we're looking at the state legislature in terms of representation is mirrored on the federal level. It is exactly what we see on the local level when it comes to diversity of our elected leaders. So as we're thinking about why that representation matters, I won't read through every single item, but it is very important to ensure that diverse voices, experiences, and needs are highlighted and met and brought to the forefront. Data tells us that leaders who represent their communities are better equipped to address and identify, I think keyword being identify, the needs within their own community, but bring them to the forefront for those to be addressed. Policies that are shaped by a diverse group of people tend to be more comprehensive, not just for the community that they represent, but for the broader community that they live in. A great example of this would be what we experience every day with curb cuts, right? The ADA passed in the 1990s, which is shocking for most people. And as a result of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, curb cuts were introduced to streets and sidewalks. And those were designed particularly for community members that had disabilities that were using a mobility device. But how many of us would say that we have utilized that for various other reasons, whether that would be a child on a stroller, right, that we've used that curb cut for. We've utilized that with our shopping and grocery carts. I see that all the time. Use it across the board. So a lot of times policies that are designed with the idea of enhancing access and equity for one particular group or individual or group or community tend to impact the entire community positively. So we wanted to bring this conversation to the forefront and think about how, as we think about our local community, our state, and broader, why is it important for us to start addressing representation broadly in terms of our legislature? Because we know that's where decisions get made that impact laws, that impact access, and impact equity. To do that today, I'm really excited to be joined by two of our community members who have experience on both fronts. On one front, they have the lived experience of being diverse community members, but they also have had the experience of navigating the ballot process and trying to get into decision-making roles, and would love to share their experiences on both ends. So Tawonda Burks is an entrepreneur and owner of ELOCINA. If you received the invitation, you've also seen her biography, and I'm sure she will do a great job of introducing herself when it gets to her portion. Thank you, Tawonda, for joining us today and for sharing your experience and expertise. As you listen to what she shares today, please think of some questions that you might have for her or any reflections that you might want to share with her. We're also joined by Walé Elegbede, who is the president of the Rochester NAACP. Again, his biography was shared earlier in the announcement, but I've shared it here, and he will also do, I'm sure, a wonderful job of introducing himself. And as you listen to Walé and as he shares his experiences, thoughts, and ideas, please think of any questions that you might have for him or any reflections that you have. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass it on to Tawonda to go ahead and share with us her experiences as she thinks about leadership at the ballot and beyond. Thank you, Tawonda.
Thank you, Chow, for that introduction and great overview. I am excited to see so many familiar faces here on Zoom today. So give me just a second, I'll share my slides with you. Can we see them okay?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So I am Tawonda Burks. I don't want to go deep in my bio. It was shared earlier, but I'll go through my life rather quickly. Born and raised in Chicago, just like a lot of people of color here in Rochester, but I'm very specific. I'm from out west and not out south. A lot of people like to assume we're all from the same community, and we're not. And also assume that we're all family, and we're all not. However, I am related to majority of the Black people here in the community, but that's a whole nother story. We'll talk about some other day. I do have 5 beautiful children and 1 grandchild as well. And I would like to say that with each child came a new degree. So when I moved to Rochester almost 30 years ago, I was 18, just gotten married. My mother moved here and I got here and I didn't understand Rochester. It was not a lot of people of color. I didn't get this community, don't understand it. Everyone says, good morning, how are you doing? How was the weekend? And where I'm from, that was not normal. So it's completely different. So I wanted out of Rochester at 18 years of age. So I did leave, moved to Orlando, Florida for a couple years, and that's when I became pregnant with my first child. And at that point in time, I realized, oh, Rochester wasn't so bad. It's a nice small community. It's a nice place to raise your kids, you know, so I had a different perspective on what Rochester was. So I did move back. And like I said, it's been almost 30 years I've been here in this community. And many years ago, I opened up the first beauty supply store here for people of color. And that was based off a need that I had myself, right? As well as the other individuals in the community. And I think after that experience, when I started to get more people of color ask me about my journey and how did I do it, is when I became more familiar of the lack of resources that existed here in Rochester. So I started to help other people navigate that space and understand what entrepreneurship was. And in order for me to do that, I had to educate myself as well. So again, my journey started many years ago with educating myself and others with entrepreneurship, small business ownership, and things like that. Started to volunteer about 10 years ago, serving on various committees and boards, which allowed me to bring perspectives from the community that was not heard. In a lot of cases, I was tapped on my shoulder to serve on certain committees and board as well to help with institutional changes. That led me over the years to run for county commissioner. You know, I was asked to run for other elected positions as well, but I thought the county commissioner position was fitting simply because of a lot of the needs that specifically the Black community needed was more county related services. You know, those health and human services is where I felt like I had a stronger voice to help in that space. So that's a little bit about who I am. So like I mentioned, over the years, a lot of work that I've done within the community, working with various organizations, professionally and volunteering, I noticed there was a lot of gaps, right? Like we all do. And the issue for me became, why do diverse voices that we do have in this community remain unrepresented in leadership roles across our local communities, right? We do have a coalition of Black leadership, but there's a whole ample amount of other individuals within this community that has the experience and expertise to serve in these positions, but yet it remains unrepresented. So despite having these qualified and capable individuals that's in our community, the representation gaps exist, and we all know this. This lack of diversity impacts policymaking, equitable resources allocation, as well as trust and leadership. Why does it matter? Of course, we know that representation builds trust. Communities that trust systems when they see themselves represented, right? We hear this all the time, right? So we have to make change in order for this to take place. Diverse perspectives lead to better decisions. Inclusions ensure all voices are considered and policy decisions as well, right? Now, the key word for this is inclusion, right? That's very, very important. And then, of course, breaking systematic barriers, encouraging the future generations to aspire leadership roles as well. If we don't start to see this representation in these roles and these leadership roles, our future generations will be exactly the same years from now. Some of those barriers that I see, and I'm sure there's a lot more that Walé may talk about or we may discuss during our Q&A portion. Again, is the systematic inequities that exist, historical and structural barriers, lack of mentorship opportunities, through structured pathways for mentorships and leadership development. Now, don't get me wrong, when I mention this here, there's a lot of mentorship programs, but not specifically for people of color that exist in this community. And that's very important because we're going back to the representation matters. Bias in voter registration and participation. That is huge, right? Stereotypes and assumptions about these leadership capabilities and limited access to networks and resources, unequal access to campaign funding and influential networks. The reason why I bring up bias in voter participation is because these stereotypes that do exist, I talk to a lot of people of color all the time that want to be a part of the election process and have their name on the ballot. However, the stereotypes that exist and the fear that they feel that they will face if they do participate in this, what that looks like for them. So it prevents them from moving forward. So some pathways, and again, there's a lot more recommendations that we have, pathways to move forward. And I intentionally did not put a lot of photos in my presentation, just because I wanted to save this one for last. This is my youngest child and my grandchild. So she's the proudest 6-year-old auntie that exists. So I wanted to share that photo here because I wanted to know, what does the future look like for them? You know, as a Black woman and a Black male, being raised in this community. So some of the things that I see for a path forward is to invest in voter education programs, develop consistent, accessible voter education initiatives to increase civic participation, mentorship and leadership development programs, create structured mentorship programs to guide emerging entrepreneurs and leaders. I do a lot of work in entrepreneurship and small business, so I say that a lot. But emerging leaders, funding support for diverse candidates as well, advocate for equitable campaign financing opportunities. Community policy forums, host regular community forums to discuss local issues and build policy solutions. And strengthen partnership with advocacy organizations as well. And the last slide that I have here, it's talking beyond the ballot. Beyond the ballot is where change begins, but leadership ensures that it never ends. And again, if there's any questions for me, we'll save them for the end because I do have a lot more to share, but I'll give Walé the opportunity to share his slides next.
Thank you, Tawonda. Walé, let me know if you need my assistance with anything, but let's welcome Walé.
Yeah, thank you all. Tawonda, excellent presentation. Glad to be doing this with you. Can you all see my screen? Okay, great.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so I'm also excited just to and humbled to be with you all. You know, this topic is a really important one, you know, and obviously the fact that you're all here, you think it is. So again, thank you for for being here. I'm not going to spend too much time on my bio. You know, I play a lot of roles in addition to to the NAACP, work in Mayo Clinic, lots of experience in diverse businesses and industries. So again, there's more to Walé than just the NAACP, but the NAACP is an important part because we are doing a lot of great work, meaningful work, important work, in our community, and I encourage you to engage with us. We have a lot of exciting programs and exciting initiatives that you'll see throughout the year. So engage with us in doing this good work. In terms of additional things that I bring to the table. So I'm all about innovation and transformation. And so, I have a business background where I was able to start a software company, that essentially was the way I was able to pay my way through college. I'm originally from Nigeria. I came to the States without access to financial aid or student loans, and had a lot of challenges where it was tough to eat. There was a point in my life where I had no food in the kitchen. There was not even a single grain of rice. I had no idea about food pantries, and I had a family member had to ship me food all the way from Texas. So when I say truly that there was nothing in the kitchen, and I was looking, not even a grain of rice. So a lot of this, obviously has built my resiliency, but it also, drives me and motivates me to do things better for myself as well as the community. So again, my journey is really about becoming a better leader, not just for myself and family, but for all of us. Been engaged in different industries, from manufacturing to just transformative things that we're doing in healthcare. The other thing that I do is, I do a lot of leadership, and both Tawonda and I, we are folks that we like to learn, and we're all both doing our doctoral programs, and leadership is something that I think is extremely important, and so that's something else that I do in terms of leadership and motivation, speaking at the national level. And entrepreneurship too, that is something else that I'm involved in, and so you all will start to see some of this in the future. And I figured that this is a good opportunity for me to talk about, at least just to highlight, the business that I'm involved in, LA, in addition to my other roles. And there is a 30-second video clip. I'm going to play that because why not? And so at the bottom of this is building bridges through the diversity of human connection, ideas, and leadership. And really, that is, my why. I believe in the power of human connection, ideas, and connections, and bridges must build us together. And so my goal is always about, transformational change. How do we make a place better than we've met it? How do we, transform ourselves? How do we transform people? Transform health and our communities and organizations. So again, that is my why. And so across, the spectrum of stuff that I do, that is always centered, people, as well as positive transformation. In terms of just the reflection on running for election, I similarly had experienced some of what Tawonda probably did. And it was a mixed bag. I appreciated, there's just so many amazing community members that I got a chance to meet throughout the process. But there's still so much more for us to do in Rochester as a community. And so I basically ran to really, with the premise of one community together. This was after the murder of George Floyd. And I felt there was a need for a different voices to be heard. My family played an important role, in supporting me, and that was really important. And sometimes the journey of leadership is lonely, and so there are times where you're going alone to door knock, and there are times where others are able to join you. And so whether people are seeing you or not is something that's important work. you know, and then along the way, you know, people started to show up and support, people that, you know, I did not expect. And, you know, friends were made, you know, pets were petted. No babies were hugged, you know, although I love babies, but you know, and businesses and that I didn't expect to support, and individuals, you know, did support. And even people in, you know, rural areas saying, hey, well, you know what, I want to make sure that there is that representation. Please feel free to put your sign on my cornfield, right? So those are things that were part of, you know, things that I learned. And also, you know, the person that I ran against that I lost, Mark Time, a good gentleman, you know, able to build a good relationship. And our election was really built on, there was mutual respect, and you could be disagreed on the policies. And I think we need a lot more of that, you know, in this day and age, you know, organizationally as well as politically. So leadership matters. And when I think about just the challenges we have in Rochester, you know, similar to across, you know, the state and the nation, you know, sometimes it's really, you know, we can sort of get stuck and not want to move. And John Lewis, you know, he reminds us that darkness cannot overcome darkness, only light can do that. Violence cannot overcome violence, only peace can do that. And hate cannot overcome hate, only love can do that. And so we need to, with our frustration, we need to channel that into something constructive and something important. And so it's important for us not to be caught in that sea of despair, but to really move towards, to have hope and move towards action. You know, service and leadership is love made visible. I will also say that leadership requires action. And when I look at, you know, just those that lack of diversity and leadership, well, it really erodes social trust. And we have, you know, a lot of community members, and Tawanda mentioned this, where, well, maybe I don't want to run because, you know, I don't think people are going to vote for me. Well, that is not coming out of nowhere. You know, if we look at the history of Rochester, we're like what 16% from a black an African American perspective. How many percentage are in local leadership as well as organizational leadership? Not a lot, right? So again, social trust plays a role into that. And so if we want to build social trust in Rochester, which is a psychological state where, you know, people, you know, expect that positive things are going to happen to them. And when those positive things don't happen to them, when they're following all the rules, you know, when you have qualified individuals, you know, that really erodes trust. So we have work to do. But I do know we can get there, but it's gonna be on all of us. You know, we need to educate ourselves. You know, there has to be that individual accountability as well as that organizational accountability. You know, but it's also not something that I think that if we just have to leave ourselves alone, that things will happen. There has to be intentionality into this. And I'll just have us ponder on, you know, this theory by Alport in 1945. It talks about intercontact hypothesis. Basically, what it's saying is that, you know, they found that when they put groups of people together, you know, and, you know, there was equal status, and there was cooperation, you know, where cooperation was highly encouraged and sometimes even forced, working towards the same goals, you know, and there was also the social and institutional support. Good things happened, you know, in the military, the U.S. military, for example, you know, during the earlier world wars, you know, before the military was segregated, which was in part due to the help of the NAACP and others. But they forced black and white soldiers to be together. And initially there was a lot of resistance, you know, but throughout that process, eventually what happened was, hey, the white soldiers, you know, said, hey, you know what, I trust that black soldier. I need that person to be on, you know, to guard my back, because now we're colleagues. I know him. I trust him, right? And so we have an opportunity there. You know, how many of us have invited, you know, a person of color over to our homes, or somebody of a different background over to our homes, right? So there are some things that we can do individually. And whatever we pay attention to, that's where the energy goes, and that's where the focus is going to grow. So uh, if we focus and if we have that intentionality, then we can absolutely do it. But it's going to require action. Um, as I spent a lot of time, reflecting, because I think critical reflection is important, as Paula Ferrer has talked about, but you also need that action, and so if we want to really transform, it's going to require that action. And in the end, Rochester is a great community. We have good people. We have a lot of work to do. But greatness is only achieved when people are actually moved into action. And so as we go into the whole, the Q&A portion, I want you all to sort of ponder, what are you going to commit to, in 2025? What are you going to learn? And how are you going to translate that into action? Individually, what are you going to do to hold yourself accountable? And regardless of your station, whether you're a city employee, whether you're an organizational leader, whether you're a team leader, we all play different leadership roles, but it is still leadership. What are you going to do individually? And then, organizationally, what are you going to do? If you're or a department head or a CEO or a small business owner, what are you going to do to make sure that, okay, well, how do I contribute to make sure that Rochester, we have more diverse voices, to have that representation? Because the numbers don't lie, and the number shows there's a big gap. And then, from a community perspective, we have a lot of community leaders. What are you going to do to ensure that, we're making meaningful progress? And how are we going to measure that? So those are the things that, again, at the end of the day, we need to put our words into action if we want our society to reflect what we're looking at. Diversity, I mean, it improves everything that Tawonda mentioned. It also improves innovation. And so, if we want Rochester to be the best place for everyone to live and work, then people also have to be able to choose qualified people. And we've had boatloads of qualified Black and underrepresented people. So I'll just leave there, but I really appreciate, the opportunity to be here. Looking forward to the conversation, and feel free to engage with me.
Thank you, Walé. And thank you, Tawonda, both of you, for that. And Tawonda, it sounds like you had a question for Walé, but before you get there, just encourage folks, if they have questions or reflections, to place those in the chat. Wafa will monitor those so that we could have a robust kind of conversation about how we move forward. Tawonda?
No, I was just actually going to respond to Walé's question as far as what are you going to do? And that's a great question. And I could start with myself, and maybe others can open it up as well. One of the things, again, because I'm passionate about the work that I do, is through what I plan to do in 2025, starting actually now, is continue to give back through the Minority Business Academy, where we don't just focus on entrepreneurship and small business ownership, but we're also focusing on leadership development as well for the minority community. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as far as that question that Walé proposed as, what are you going to do?
Thank you. Thank you, Tawonda.
I would just add to Tawanda's point, for those of you out there that have the ability to support a great organization, hers is one of those. And we're putting money behind it. It's not, we all like to talk a good game, and there's a lot of doers around this call. But I would encourage others to continue to, we're requesting funding for her efforts. She is, and we're very, very supportive of that. So if you do have organizational funds that could help that work, it's really, really important. Sorry for the commercial interruption. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, John. I think while folks are thinking about questions or reflections, I have a couple of items just for both you and for Tawonda and for Walé, as you reflect on this. So grounding us in the idea that leadership is obviously beyond the ballot. We have elected leaders, but we also have across organizations represented on this call, other ways of folks contributing in leadership roles, whether that's boards or commissions, etc. So what are some things that you think, Tawonda and Walé, that organizations can do to diversify some of that leadership that works on policies within their own organizations beyond elections?
Yeah, maybe I think it starts with a strategic vision. So I'll take just if we look at the school board, for example, when they were coming up with your a new plan, this was something that the community was involved in. I played as well as others played an important role in that and making sure that it was centered on equity, right? And so I know that that plan is going to be successful. I know what that outcome is going to be because the vision is a good vision. Now you need to put action into place to affect it. But I think organizations, as well as even small businesses, you need to look at your vision and how do you really center equity and that representation into it. So I think it would start with that. And then we can figure out all the other things in terms of measurement, people. So
I would add to that because I'm big on education. So I would say invest in educational programming around these initiatives, especially like I mentioned before, voter education, right? What does that process look like? And even those that want to, put themselves in a position to run for an elected position, even if it's not an elected position, even giving people within your organizations the opportunities to serve on committees to get that experience and what many would call a seat at the table and have them be a part of that process and change within the organization. But again, it goes back to the education and being intentional with giving individuals opportunities.
yeah, yeah, and maybe if I could just follow up with that too, Tawanda, excellent point. I think there's also yes, there's a voter education where we're talking about qualified individuals and making sure that they can actually be successful, but our broader community as well. I think how are you encouraging your colleagues, your staff, family members to support new voices, right? So that education goes into that as well. And a good way is by them seeing you demonstrate that, right? Not just at the ballot, but the choices you make in terms of we're going to support a diverse, a Black-owned business. We're going to buy from a diverse restaurant. So even the choices you make. But if you're saying, well, hey, diversity is great, but you never actually use your funds or your walk or your talk to to showcase that. Well, you're saying one thing and your action is showing something else. So I think the more we're consistent, then it becomes that will cascade down too.
Listening to both of you, I'm reflecting on something that the state demographer had shared. And in her summary, she said, for the first time in the 2020 census that the city had grown, city of Rochester specifically, and the only way it had grown was particularly by communities of color. That was the biggest growth that they'd seen. We see this reflected in our Rochester Public Schools data. So I think my question is, for private organizations, what can they do to invest in the growth of future leadership, knowing that a lot of the young people who are growing up in our community, in our future community, are going to be very diverse? So just open to both of you as you reflect on leadership in general.
Yeah, I think this goes back directly to, when Tawanda talks about like educational programs. So if you look at like from the NAACP, we have a collaboration with Mayo Clinic, at the Rise Fee. And this is really a leadership development program where we're talking about servant leadership, wellness, financial literacy, all of that stuff. Project management. There's so much stuff that we're talking about, but really we're trying to really empower these young leaders And so I think, investing in, initiatives like that. There's another initiative that we're doing that is really more focused towards, the community and Tawonda and the weekend where we basically had a financial literacy workshop with leadership as well as coaching, right? So I think those are things that folks can do, and that do make a difference. But there has to be so for a small business owner, investing in things like that, but also having, targets and saying, what, what do we want our 2025 to look like? At the end of the year, where do we want to see ourselves? And then being able to have, being intentional where you have initiatives that you're gonna put in place. You need to have investments that you're gonna put in place. And then, at the end of the year, see, okay, well, did we meet that? And collaboration, collaborating with a lot of good organizations doing the work.
I would echo what Walé said. In addition to that, professional development is very big. I don't know if many organizations still invest in that for their employees, but if not, I think that still should be a thing. And being able to, with that professional development, being able to allow employees the opportunity and not just type policies around that professional development, if that makes sense. Meaning, for example, when I worked at Mayo Clinic for many years, Mayo Clinic invested in my professional development. It was nothing related to the healthcare industry at all, but it was the fact that they invested in me as an individual and my leadership growth and development, with skill sets that I can use outside of the organization. And so I think that if organizations have professional development policies that would allow the individuals to not just grow for that organization, but for their future as well, I think is very beneficial. And again, it goes back to, the barriers that exist institutional, to a lot of people of color, and what does that look like? So it's looking at those policies that's internal as well, that would allow for individuals to grow and being able to expand with other, curious things that they want to do or experience for that development.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly jump in here, Tawonda, just bolstering what you sort of shared. So the other thing that organizations can do, or individuals within those organizations, especially if you're like a team leader, are you coaching, are you mentoring your colleagues, diverse backgrounds? There's something like called the 70-20-10 plan, which is 70% of the work we do, we learn it by hands-on. We also 20% then is also about from collaboration, and then 10% is formal. Within your organization, are you creating, those opportunities for people to have stretch assignments, those opportunities where you're saying, what, this is a project that would be a good fit for you that you should try, right? So again, it's translating these ideas into action, and then and by building trust too, so obviously you need to build trust to get to that stage. But I think having like an individual plan for your team members, then they know that, hey, they'll know that, hey, John actually cares about me. He's not just talking about the vision, but on our regular checkup, he's helping me hold myself accountable, or providing resources or access to people that can get me there.
Yeah, thank you both for that. I see that Shelly has her hand up. Thank you, Shelly.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you. Thanks so much for this wonderful discussion. Walé, I was wondering if you could talk a little about the Journey project and how Shauna is tied in with this kind of.
Yeah, the NAACP doesn't have is a different organization from Journey, so I think you'd have to direct those, if there are any Journey specific questions to Nishana. But I will share with you that we are been established in Rochester from 1965, and our goal is really empowering social justice, right? We collaborate with a lot of organizations and individuals, where our vision are exactly aligned or strategically aligned. So is there like a specific question, Shelley, in terms of maybe it's, go ahead.
I don't know enough about the project I'm learning. And Shauna has been to my church on Sunday and talked about the 8-step program, and her ties with the community run, I think, 13 years long. And it's a development program, I think, but I don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
And Shelley, we can connect you with Nashana to make sure that you get as much information as possible, so I can make sure that I get that to you.
Yeah.
I'm an artist.
Yeah.
Oh,
But-
okay. Thank you.
Yeah. But Shelley, in terms of like the program that the NAACP is doing, the Rise for Youth program, we are in our 4th year, and several of you have actually played a critical role in that. This was something where, in terms of trust, how do you build trust? Well, don't just tell me about something, invite me into that process. And we've had, I see Khadija, I see several other folks that were part of Mr. George was part of that process where essentially the community NAACP being the cultural worker, but community members are actually selecting students that participate into the Rise for Youth program. There's a stipend that's provided for those young leaders. It's a 4-week program. There's also long-term mentorship that's provided. So that's something that has been, actively going on, and we're intentional in terms of how do we ensure we bring new organizations and people into that process, so that way they have a hand in the selection of these remarkable young leaders. So that's the NAACP initiatives. But I'll also share that individually, we all can do a lot. So there are people that are donating funds to support scholarship in the NAACP for folks. It's something that I'm also doing personally. So what are you doing individually, to support somebody in your community? It could be $100. I'm gonna donate $100 to a student that needs a backpack, or I'm gonna maybe sponsor somebody's lesson. So what are you doing? There are a lot of opportunities, and it also does not have to be monetary, right?
Yep. And I see Mr. Thompson has his hand up. We'll just take the one last question from Mr. Thompson and then wrap up. Thank you. Mr. Thompson, I believe you are muted.
Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. I want to, first of all, thank a lot of you that are here. One of them is, obviously, Tawonda and Walé. I really appreciate the work that you guys have done. I feel very, very proud of what you're doing in the community. I remember back in the day when I didn't see another Black person for 2 weeks, except for my wife, and things have obviously radically changed. And it's due to a lot of work from a lot of different people. Third organization, John Wade has helped, Andre and Bud, and it's just Rochester Area Foundation. So many things have happened because we've learned how to work together and help each other. And that's what needs to continue to happen. It's all about how we make the community better, totally. But considering everybody, but making sure we include those that don't have an opportunity and haven't had an opportunity to participate in some of the wealth in this community. So I just want you to know, I really do really appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. We do have a couple of comments in the chat. Mr. Alan here says, with the current pushback on DEI, I'm glad to see the mayor, IBM among some of the major entities remain steadfast in their supporting of this work. We really need to emphasize inclusion aspects and combat polarization being exploited by some not so well-meaning groups. So just wanted to highlight some of those comments and thoughts and kind of encourage us to think about equity work from that framework of creating better access and growing community members as opposed to the opposite of that. If you would like to view this episode, I do want to share that the episode is recorded and therefore can be found on the YouTube page. It is under the Destination Medical Center YouTube page. So if you are able to see my screen, that's where you will find it. We will have the next episode on February 12th at noon, a similar webinar version. But I do want to extend a really heartfelt thank you to Walé and Tawonda for sharing a little bit of your time, but for everyone who participated today. As we think about leadership beyond the ballot, we know that policy changes and legislation gets passed in that space, but we also know that in all of our organizations, we have numerous opportunities to be inclusive and to be thoughtful about how we bring community members forward who typically aren't engaged in policy making. So I really appreciate that portion of it. And having you all think about that. I also want to share that, of course, next month is Black History Month. There will be events across the community in various spaces and various organizations. So keep your email boxes open and pay attention to what comes through that way. I see Amanda Pelly has her hand up. I don't know how she knew, but she typically sends the most comprehensive message from Rochester Area Foundation that provides an overview of all of different activities throughout the month and throughout the year, commemorating and supporting the work of equity and justice. So Amanda, if you wanted to go off mute and kind of share a little bit of that, thank you.
Thank you, Chow. Yes, and I did just put an upcoming event into the chat, and I wanted to make sure to get it out in front of you all because I know you're all connected to many different folks in our community, and I would hope that you would share this out. We will be having a local National Day of Racial Healing event, which will be on Tuesday, January 21st from 5:30 to 7 p.m. As Chow alluded to, I will be sending out an email here in the near future that will include this event and others. But I just want to also say in the future, if there's ever events that you would like to get out, we have a pretty comprehensive listserv that we've developed over several years and are able to share events out community-wide. And certainly if anyone's ever interested in joining that, please feel free to have them connect with me. I'll put my email in the chat. But once again, invite you all to join us on Tuesday. We'll have some great food from Shell's Kitchen, which is back up and running. We're so pleased that they were able to recover after the fire that happened at the truck. So again, if you have any questions or want to be added to that list, please let me know. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Amanda. Because we're about 5 minutes left, we're doing well today. Beyond gratitude, just wanting to open it up for any final thoughts or reflections before we head off to the rest of our afternoon.
Yeah, I'm just grateful for you all. We have a long year ahead of us, and so it's good to start with community. So thank you for all that you guys do, and for those that we haven't engaged with, please we extend a hand of collaboration, and so let's do the work together.
Yes, thank you all. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of faces on this Zoom call that it has actually helped me on my path forward. And so my only request is that you continue to do that and to other individuals within our community to help them progress forward as well in their leadership development.
Mr. Lund?
Yeah, I would emphasize, first of all, thank you for the presentation from Tawonda and Walé. I would also, and I want to really reinforce what I put on the chat, which is to say that I'll always know that there's a pushback from many major organizations. For example, even Walmart and even those things are pushing back from people exploiting and co-opting the DI acronym, right? And I'm so glad that to reinforce the fact that I'm an IBM, retired from IBM, and we are still very much promoting, outwardly emphasizing, and not and fighting back this thing about DEI being anti something, that type of thing. So I like to see more of us kind of emphasizing the entities within Rochester, the city of government, city of Rochester, Mayo Clinic, and IBM, as well as other groups like even NWCP, and also have a sense of utilizing these opportunities to, as we talk about individual needs, for different ethnic groups in their month, and also maybe sometime in a year we'll bring all the groups together to build solidarity, to build that we are consolidating, we're emphasizing the inclusiveness of racial justice. That's kind of message I want to share.
Thank you, Mr. Lan. All right, community members, thank you for joining us, and have a good afternoon. And we hopefully will see you at our next session on February 12th at noon. Thank you.